Hello, I'm Kelly Taylor Ryan, and this is Mainly Unspoken. Today our guest is Mark Finks, and he's going to be talking about individual rights. Welcome, Mark.
Glad to be here, Kelly. Glad
Well,
to talk about individual rights. That's a very important subject.
I think it's very important, and I think it's a subject that many people don't understand. They don't know what their individual rights are.
Right.
So what are they? What are our individual rights?
Well, you could go as far back as the Magna Carta in 1215 and under the English kings, but for most people, I think they would be more familiar with the Declaration of Independence of the United States, which says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, that's quite a statement, and
Yes.
we're the envy of the rest of the world for making that statement, because we're the only government with a clear track record for a very long period of time of honoring the inherent power of the individual. We say and believe in our system that the powers that the King of England had, we acquired when we won the war for independence. So we have the sovereign powers of the King and the rights that we enumerated in our Declaration of Independence and constituted in our Constitution of the United States. They're named there specifically in the Bill of Rights. They're very, very important.
But they're named in the Bill of Rights, but isn't that's just a few examples on all of our rights? That's just a few examples. We have more rights than are listed in the Declaration of Independence. Or
That's correct.
Bill of Rights.
We retain everything that the government did not specifically get
Right.
assigned to it in the Constitution.
So we have a right to work. We have a right to marry.
Yes, and a lot of other things. Just the basic day-to-day things of living are not trivial in any sense. We have a right to make a livelihood and to prosper according to our initiative and perseverance, the hard work that we put in. Those are things that Americans deeply believe in and love, but they're very frustrated with all of the seeming incursions on our rights that occur in modern society. Yes, you have this right, but we're going to restrict it a little, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Why are we going to do that? Well, there's a compelling state interest. Oh, really? What is that? What is so big a problem that Americans' rights have to be interfered with? But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
Let's go back to the concept of the popular sovereignty, the power of the king being given to all the people of the United States. This is why we have to have elections, because without elections, the sovereign people of the United States would not be indicating on a systematic or regular basis who they wanted to represent them in the different branches of government, who was supposed to serve in the legislative branch, who's supposed to be governor or president of the U.S., and then you have to have an appointed judiciary nominated by the president or governor and approved by the Senate of the state or of the United States. So people have a certain sense of how these things are supposed to work, and that seems to make sense. People are pretty aware that they're supposed to have freedom of speech. They're supposed to be able to say what they really think, what they really believe. They're supposed to be able to publish it on a piece of paper, have freedom of the press. They're supposed to be able to peaceably assemble. They're not supposed to assemble for the purpose of causing a riot or taking weapons and shooting somebody else. But if they're assembling peaceably to discuss the public good, the common good, what it would be good for society, they have a protected right to do that.
But often you have to have permits or licenses, or you just can't assemble.
Yeah, for major gatherings, and those are supposed to be only to accommodate the logistic requirements of the event, not the ability of the government to say yes or no to your assembly, but just to accommodate the event in a logistic sense. So if they've got to have some police there to direct traffic and maybe separate warring factions or something. They want to be able to know about this ahead of time. But that so-called parade or assembly permit, whatever particular form it takes, is not supposed to take away your right of assembly or free speech. It's supposed to, in some sense, help you exercise it. It's supposed to.
Supposed to, right.
Yeah. We're
That's
not,
a big question.
sometimes it's a very big question, but what it really comes back to, what we'd like to convey in this segment about the Constitution, is that people need to have a certain zeal, a certain excitement, a certain interest in this stuff. They've got to want to hold on to their unalienable rights and use them so that they don't languish.
I don't think people really believe they have those rights.
Well, they've lost a lot of confidence that they do, because the government seems to act in such a high-handed manner toward them all the time.
What right do we have that the government doesn't put a restriction on?
Well, actually, all of the basic ones are unrestricted if you're reading the document correctly.
Well, even to get married, you need a marriage license.
Well, for a long time in this country, we did not, at least not in the sense of a state license. The correct history shows that a vital statistics book or record was kept in an individual church somewhere. You had a record of births and deaths and marriages, and the town or city clerk simply took note of those. They were informed of births and deaths, for example, and I guess were informed of marriages, but it wasn't a so-called state license until relatively recently. It used to be simply a document in a church record book, and the people would have a copy themselves. But it's only been within the last 100 or so years that we got into this thing of so-called state marriage licenses that give the impression, at least, that marriage is some kind of a privilege.
Yeah,
instead of a God-ordained institution of society, which was done before the Lord as the most solemn covenant or vow you could take with another non-related human being. You're literally becoming one flesh biblically, and here's the document that the church produced and the book in which it's recorded. That was accepted as authoritative until fairly recently. Now we have got this business with the state licenses, and you know what that was supposedly for?
What?
That was supposedly so that they could require a Wasserman test to establish that the couple did not have syphilis in one or the other members before they got married, so that the state could stamp out venereal disease.
Is that right?
Exactly. How are we doing?
Well, we're still teaching our kids about STDs.
And we have dozens of them now. We have 30 or 40 major ones, some of them fatal, some of them which will sterilize the young without their knowledge. They catch this stuff and find out later on that they're sterile and can't have children. So we would say that the state marriage license was a big flop at its supposed intention, which was to prevent the spread of venereal disease.
So then why do we still have it? It was a big flop, so if that was the original intent, why do we still have it?
Well,
Isn't that intrusive upon people's lives?
Of course it is. And not only intrusive on their lives, but it also it tends to diminish the sacred qualities of marriage and the power of the sovereign creator, and raise up this all-knowing, all-powerful government that tells you all these things. Oh, well, you accepted a state license, so you'll have to accept all of this other regulation and interference along with it. And of course, a thoughtful person would say, why? Why? If the founders of this country intended the individual to be self-governing, which they really did, that if you follow the basic principles of Judeo-Christian life and civilization and religious beliefs, you wouldn't really need much in the way of law to regulate you, because you'd already be doing what the best of laws could tell you you should do. Human nature being what it is, we say, well, if there are the criminal and the corrupt out there and so forth, the laws are basically made for the crooks. They're not made for the law-abiding, decent people, because they don't need to be restrained by law, and they don't need a heavy-handed, jackbooted character to beat them up to make them be good. And this is where our civilization is in a profound state of crisis today, because instead of having people changed on the inside sincerely from the heart, which is what Christianity is certainly all about, and the related religions, we're trying to use one of these totalitarian models based on external force and structure. That's doomed to failure.
Of course it's doomed to failure.
It's never worked anywhere in history, and it's always been a sign that the civilization was becoming more and more corrupt and
about to collapse.
Yep, and a power pyramid that was fragile or about to crumble. So we're in that position now, and America's really being tested. We're being asked a very basic question: do you want to be around for future generations, or don't you?
Well, at this rate, we're not going to be around for many generations.
Things are not looking good, and students of Bible prophecy have noticed for a long, long time that when you get to the end of the end times, when the prophecies are of Christ's return and the rise of a common world government based in Europe, the 10-nation government based in Europe, which now exists even as we speak, the United States is nowhere to be seen there in that history.
Really?
In those prophecies, there's no reference to anything that we could call the United States. So the conclusion is that we're either irrelevant to the process or have already collapsed. We're no longer there.
So basically, do you believe that the United States is going to fall into this world government and will just be part of the global system, being even more controlled and more taxed than we are now?
Well, the prophecies certainly point in that direction. My answer to that question for the age that we're living in is just to say, well, I don't know, what do you want? Do you want us to vanish and all the things that we hold dear, or not? And
I don't want us to vanish. I happen to like the Constitution, and I wish our government ran according to the Constitution.
Okay, well, that's the same question that all of our viewers have to answer for themselves. They've got to think this over and decide if they think this is a harmless or a wonderful thing to have all the nations forced together into one government or not.
I think a lot of people that I've talked to, they feel like they want to be protected, and they will give the government anything as
Sure.
long as the government will protect them.
Peace and safety. Peace and safety.
Peace and safety. I'll give up all my rights as long as you make sure I'm safe.
Right, and that's not a good sign. We can think of a lot of different parallels in history in which people were perfectly willing, it's just part of human nature, to surrender their personal rights in return for a promise of being safe and at peace. And it's just very seductive to have somebody say that, oh, that sounds good. Gosh, we all would like that, so let's do that. Well, there's a cost involved. Well, we'll pay the cost. And the cost actually is the cost of your freedoms. And the United States is the best testimony in history to the principle that individual responsibility and self-government produces wonderful results. We're the country that's had such incredible innovation and has prospered in so many wonderful ways. And then, for some reason, we have gone the parasite route, having all of these things attached to us to suck our blood dry, you know, thinking that this is going to help, it's going to improve things when the evidence indicates it's not. What shall we give as an example? The Social Security system, that's an excellent example. It's pretty clear now that if people had simply invested that money astutely over the years, they'd have been far better off financially.
Absolutely.
Than to let the government do these crazy things to them.
And they would have their privacy.
Yes, and still have some privacy and sense of family cohesiveness. This idea that we're going to let George do it, that the people of the U.S. are going to pay for my parents' retirement and so on, is a very bad thing. When you should actually take an active interest in what's going on with your parents, their retirement, their health, their method of living as they're getting older and so forth. And in place of that, we now have this hugely expensive system that will cheerfully gobble up your whole estate in return for keeping you, you know, in these facilities for a few months or years.
Absolutely. They have that reverse mortgage now.
Sure. They'll just suck all the money out and there's nothing left but an empty husk.
But isn't that what our system has done? by taking away our rights, they've also taken away our wealth, because we'd open the door for
the
them
two
to-
things, yeah, the two things really do go together. Our purpose in discussing the individual rights component of our government, which would be the vigorous exercise of free speech, assembly, the ballot, very important to vote knowledgeably, because if you don't, you're going to get a bunch of rascals holding office and so forth. And you can readily see these things acting in society today. When people are diligent, some good things start to happen. When they're apathetic and ignore things, very bad things start to happen. The saxophone playing president who preceded George W. there was perhaps as ugly a testimony to the openly corrupt as we've ever seen in the presidency. People were just plain confused. People voted for him who had no business doing so, just on the basis of his being a purported Southern Baptist or whatever they thought
So
at
do you
the
think
time.
the other guy would have been better? What type of choice did they have? I mean,
Yeah, we are going to get about as good a government as we deserve. And by being so disengaged and disinvolved, we've permitted political hacks to occupy offices that they probably had no business being. But to revitalize that system, you have to start right in the local community and find some really vital people who can go in and mix it up on the local school board and board of selectmen and town council, things of that nature. You've got to find these people and encourage them, support them from the outside once they're elected. Because a lot of times an office holder might have difficulty raising an issue that might better be carried as an issue by the citizenry themselves. They're not trying to run for office, or they're not susceptible to being thrown out of office. They're not holding one. They're just the citizens with the right of free speech and assembly, and they can speak up very boldly about things that an office holder might have to be at least more outwardly neutral about. And people have to remember that. It doesn't stop just when you get a good candidate elected. That is kind of the start of the process. He's going to try to do certain things as an office holder, but people on the outside have to help sustain that effort by raising the issues and keeping those issues
in focus.
in focus, keeping them vital. I can name lots of different things in Maine currently that are lacking public attention and discussion.
Name some.
Well, the education system's a good example. We've got a system in which the federal government de facto has virtually leveraged control of all the state and local educational bureaucracy. So we now have got this federalized system of education, a big power pyramid, which bodes ill for the future of education in this country.
Because they're going to control what the kids learn.
Yeah, they're actually going to have what amounts to political control of people's work.
And the money, too.
The money that goes with it. So people would have to really go at that one strongly and say, we just woke up. We just realized what you're doing. You're trying to run a system similar to the Soviet Polytech system, in which a child is tracked along from grade 4, maybe age 10, through the whole process of life, and he's kind of shunted or assigned into a vocational track. He doesn't have decisions himself, and this will be couched in some glorious public-private partnership type language. Oh, you know, this company's doing this, that company's doing that, and in return we're giving them access to the labor pool here, these little social units that we call people that we're manipulating with the system.
So what they do give to us or propose to us, it sounds good a lot of the time.
Well, it's always we're going to get your kid a job, he's going to be employed and support himself. And parents breathe a heavy sigh of relief. Gee, I'm tired of doing it, so wonderful, the kid will be working. But the heavy-handed control that the education establishment and the government has developed for itself is horrendous.
And it's wiping out all our individual rights.
Well, it certainly is hostile to them, and if Americans really thought about it, it's foreign to all of our beliefs and traditions. The thing that we believe about America is that when people innovate and create and work, they aspire and receive the fruits of their labors, that wonderful things happen.
You put energy in and great things happen. If you're passive and have things, you know, provided for you, your brain atrophies.
Well, yeah, there's a funny story told about the mainland communist Chinese, where they at one point, I think when Mao was still living, or maybe shortly after that, in one of their cultural revolutions there, they changed the workday from 8 hours a day to 12 hours a day. 50% longer, 4 more hours every day. Whoa, what we were going to create such great things. And the Chinese, quietly said, not too loudly, well, we wind up doing the same amount of work. It just takes us 4 hours longer, And that's a good example. They live in a completely controlled society where they're told what they're going to receive for a wage or salary, and then they are quote, competitive with goods in the West, and they're in all of our retail stores with things that are dirt cheap and
killing our economy.
Killing our economy off, and it's the communist slave labor versus what is supposed to be a free market here in the United States. Americans need to think that one through. Like if you're undermining your own economy by buying products made with slave labor and funding the Chinese military in the process, since they run all the industry.
But families' budgets are so small, and they just say, well, I'm going to buy it, and I won't do too much harm.
Not thinking the thing through.
Right, not thinking.
And lest we get too far afield from our subject, the whole concept of individual rights means that you use your smarts and think ahead and think about the consequences of your actions so that what you're doing today is going to lead you somewhere good tomorrow.
Well, with all those people with, you know what I was told? I was almost shocked. I was talking to someone and saying, and they're sending these college kids, 18-year-old kids, credit cards, right?
Yes.
And a friend of mine said, oh, that's nothing. She has a 13-year-old daughter, and her 13-year-old daughter now is getting credit cards. They're starting them in junior high school.
How profitable and enslaving this must be, similar to giving out heroin samples. Here, try some of this. This is for your nerves,
Exactly.
Get the kid hooked on plastic money and credit, and they'll wind up spending most of their adult life working for the credit card company.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so people aren't thinking ahead. Oh, I have this plastic credit card, $3,000, $12,000, and before they know it, they're hooked on it, and they're not free. That's so sad.
Immediate gratification wins every time. So they think.
Tell me about our right, our unalienable right to education. Is there one?
Hard to say fast. There's an unalienable right to pursue happiness, because we say so in the Declaration of Independence. Now, it's a pretty neat piece of bait and switch to say, well, pursuing happiness is going to the government schools and doing what they tell you. That's pretty funny. Well, funny peculiar or funny ha-ha, you decide. But the accounts that we're getting from the homeschoolers are pretty clear. The homeschool family has certain gritty issues to work through. It's the relationship between parents and children in an academic setting. That's generally the biggest challenge, is trying to settle down so you have an agreement about what you're going to do. But once they get that going, and the parents and children are working cooperatively together, it's very easy for a child to more than maintain himself at grade level, actually beyond grade level, in a short amount of time per day, 2 or 3 hours of concentrated work, when the government schools are trucking these kids around in buses and lining them up and taking them to lunch and doing this and doing that. The amount of actual useful information which is delivered en masse or in group settings with a kind of a collectivist group project approach, these different things that we see now in the government schools, this uses up a huge amount of time. And the kids are apathetic and uninformed and unaccomplished. They are just slick at relating their emotions and relating to their fellow students. That's about it. But reading, writing, counting, and thinking, that's a different matter. And that's what the homeschoolers have shown, that they can do par excellence without any government training or involvement.
They can do wonderful works, the kids are more motivated, and they have more time to devote to their studies.
Well, and they're also...
If they can do everything in 2 hours, where we have our kids in school for 6 or more hours,
Sure, well, we'll say 3 in half the time, with ease.
With ease, absolutely. I used to tutor.
Yeah.
I used to tutor kids. If they had to go home from school because they were sick, they would lose 6 or 7 hours. In an hour, I could easily take them through the day. easily.
Sure.
It's scary. It used to scare me.
Sure. Well, it's a one-on-one situation, and the child comes to understand that and like it, and he is spending time in the company of adults. And the proof is in the pudding there. A child who spends his time with adults is far better socialized, far better equipped to deal with things than a child who spends his time in the company of kids his own age who teach each other their nasty habits. Where an adult, as a mature individual, especially if it's the child's parent, has a very strong vested interest in that child's success and is going to give the child the best of what he knows, the best of his wisdom and experience, and that child's going to get that continually, where otherwise he would be spending time with his peer group. And the peer group is young. They have no wisdom and they have no knowledge, and they have the nasty habits that kids have when they're young, so they all share the same stuff. And it seems pretty clear that the homeschoolers are light years ahead of their age group because those things happen. And while we're on the subject of individual rights, we may as well throw this one in for good measure. There's a movement among homeschoolers today to reestablish courtship. Their children don't go out and date socially. They think that's training for divorce. You're just getting your kid thoroughly confused about who he likes and who his allegiances are to and so forth. Where in a courtship situation, the young man, will say, comes to the family and presents himself to the family. Says, I'm Joe Blow here, and this is what I do, and this is what I aspire to do. Oh, very nice, Mr. Blow. Won't you, come in and we'll have some tea and talk. And what they're finding is there's been several long years of experience with this, that these kids can actually pick out somebody suitable to marry who really has character, who really has something to offer. They're not involved in the promiscuity and all the other problems that young people are involved in today, so they can actually get married at a sensible age and stay married to that one in person and raise a family with that person. The evidence is overwhelming that it's true. So when you're talking about individual rights, it isn't just your right to speak in a public meeting, it's also your right to choose education for your family and to help them form families of their own and do some of these things. And it's pretty clear that the more you do that yourself, the better off you are.
You can go deeper into morals. You can keep the family wealth.
Sure, and as far as resisting what Madison Avenue and Hollywood want to sell the young, you have a better shot at it. Not because you're being authoritarian and restrictive, but because you've got something more constructive going in your own family. As I think back in my own experiences in my childhood, the larger families that had a really orderly government and good religious values and so forth, those were households were a pleasure to visit, because things made sense. There was real love in that home, and when they entertained guests, you were kind of included as part of this big family. It was just a wonderful experience. I had certain of my friends when I was young who were real standouts in that regard, and as adults, they've done really very well. They've done better than the homes with the indulgent parents who kind of let their kids run and paid a price for that.
We only have about 40 seconds left. One thing I'd like to make clear is that the federal government isn't supposed to be involved with the state education.
Yeah, the federal government is not supposed to be involved with our daily lives at all. And in wrapping up this segment on individual rights, the thing to remember about individual rights, we got to use them vigorously and visibly, and make authority answer you.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Mark. It's been a pleasure as usual.
Well.
All right, everyone, you want to find out what are your individual rights. How can you start claiming them and using them to make your life better for you and your family? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.